Welcome everyone to the webinar on grass-fed dairy, opportunities and challenges in this rapidly growing market by Heather Darby and Sarah Flack. I'm your host, Alice Formiga of eOrganic. eOrganic has many articles, videos, and webinars about organic farming and research, and you can find all of them by typing webinars by eOrganic into a search engine, and you can also find the recordings on the eOrganic YouTube channel. We are recording this webinar and we'll have the recording available on YouTube within 1 to 2 weeks. This webinar will last about 45 minutes to an hour, and when it's over, we'll have 30 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A box on your webinar control panel at any time. If you don't see the Q&A box, there should be a black bar with some controls at the bottom of your screen, and if you click on the Q&A one, that should pull it up. So I would like to welcome back our presenters today. Dr. Heather Darby is an agronomist at the University of Vermont Extension, where she conducts applied research and outreach on farm-based fuel, forage, and grain production systems in New England. Heather also leads the eOrganic dairy team, and she operates a certified organic farm with her husband in northern Vermont. Sarah Flack is a national consultant specializing in organic and grass-based livestock production systems. She participates in research projects, and she also does one-on-one consulting with farmers. She grew up on a grass-based livestock farm in northern Vermont. So with that, I am going to hand over the screen controls to our first presenter, Heather Darby. So Heather, you should be able to click on the screen and take control.
Yep, I'm just waiting for it to work. Thank you, Alice. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having us on eOrganic again. And thanks to everyone who's attending the webinar today. Hopefully we can get everyone excited about grass-fed organic milk and the work that we're doing and the work that we're planning to do in the future. So I thought I would start by defining what we're talking about when we say 100% grass-fed organic milk. There isn't actually, I don't think, a defined definition at this point. Sarah Flack was joking with me, saying that every paper that she reads, essentially it says, for the purposes of this work or the purposes of this paper, this is how we define grass-fed organic milk. So this is how we define 100% grass-fed organic milk for the purposes of our research project. So grass-fed milk comes from dairy animals fed a diet without grain in their ration. The ration is instead a mixture of different types of forages, not just grass. Maybe we should change the whole market, call it, I don't know what, forage fed, but not just grass. Obviously, legumes, grasses, and forbs, such as chicory, plantain, dandelion, and other species as well. But no grain, that's the key. That also includes corn silage, in case you're wondering, and other annual forages that have kind of grain formation, like a small grain silage as well. So generally and usually required is additional supplementation with minerals as needed. Okay. So grass-fed dairy production is, or has been, a really fast-growing market. It's been a highlight really for dairy in general, as dairy markets are kind of stagnant organic dairy markets, but grass-fed itself, interest by consumers and increases in demand has led to increases in the number of farms that are also producing grass-fed milk. So in 2016, when we started this project, there were approximately 140 farms that were calling themselves 100% grass-fed, and now today, currently in 2018, there's roughly about 400 farms. So just in a couple of years, you can see the expansion of grass-fed dairy. One of the things that we know is that there's a wide range of successful production management systems. I guess just like any other dairy operation, what makes a dairy operation successful is different from farm to farm. And I think if you probably ask any extension person or consultant a question about what makes a farm successful, they say it depends. And it's not any different with our work that we've observed so far with grass-fed dairy. As I said before, it's a rapidly growing sector of the organic milk market. And what we've been trying to do through our research, and a little bit about what we'll present today, is understand what are the common challenges among these farms. They may be very different in how they manage, but are there common challenges that we can identify and then hopefully help farmers overcome, those that are in the market and those that want to enter the market. Then we are trying to look at key management practices to assure success. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, what we found so far. And then innovative solutions, again, to overcoming the challenges that we see with this market. And lastly, today we'll talk about next steps, our ongoing research and outreach with this sector of dairy. So like I said, just like any other dairy farm or dairy system, there's a wide range of production systems. And that's the same with grass-fed organic dairy. So we have fully seasonal farms, so farms that are drying off animals for one period of time, so they're only milking during a part of the year. Partially seasonal farms. We have farms that milk once per day and twice per day. Actually, don't think we ran across any farms that were milking more than that. Farms with very different milk production goals. Some farms really driven to see how much milk they can produce with only forage, only grass and no grain, and other farms saying that, you know, producing a certain level is just fine by us and we're meeting our economic goals. These farms tend to be focusing on components of the milk instead of yield. And again, like other farms, we see a variety of breeds and breeding focuses, so what people are breeding for. We see different calving intervals, and Sarah will talk a lot about this, and a variety of calf rearing methods as well. So again, it's hard to classify these farms or characterize them under one umbrella. They're all, not all of them, but many of them are operating in different ways. So some of the common challenges that we have observed before we started the project too, but as we're getting into the project, some of the common challenges we're hearing is meeting the forage quantity and quality demand of the animals, and the increased acreage that a farm will need, or they're going to need to purchase more forage once they eliminate grain from the ration. Mineral supplementation, what to supplement, if they should be supplementing. These are challenging. Managing milk urea nitrogen, managing MUNs. We see very divergent cases, very high, very low, and some right in the middle. Raising replacements. Managing depleted soils. This is a challenge that many farmers are trying to overcome, or, you know, if they're just transitioning, an issue people are trying to avoid, which is when you're exporting more nutrients in the form of milk than you're importing in the form of grain or fertilizer, you'll end up likely depleting your soils. So farmers are very concerned about this, as are we. Needed for basically improved pasture productivity, quality, and acreage. So really having to focus on maximizing pasture productivity. Monitoring dry matter intake and reproductive performance and body condition scoring. These are all common challenges that these farmers are facing, and then financial challenges as well. So I'm going to be shifting over to Sarah in a second. I'm just going to finish this last slide. So just a heads up for Alice, that we have been working with this group of grass-fed organic dairies since 2016. We were awarded a grant from Northeast SARE, which helped us create a grass-fed monitor program, which is a monthly benchmarking program that we've been implementing in the Northeast. And I want to be sure to highlight Faye Benson to make sure that folks know that he was really the person that helped us kind of write this grant and develop the grass-fed monitor. So Sarah's going to be talking about some of the research we've collected from this monthly benchmarking program. And then in 2017, Organic Valley Farms Advocating for Organic provided us additional support to be able to develop some outreach materials from all this data that we were collecting, and also to look at forage varieties and variety trials with a focus on quality and increasing sugar production in forages. And then in 2018, our team was awarded a Northeast Risk Management and Education grant so that we could add DHIA milk testing and herd production records to our monthly benchmarking program. So this is all work that we've been doing for the last 2 years, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Flack now so that she can start talking about some of the results.
Great. All right. All right, I'm unmuted now. So I can see there's some questions coming in already from folks about the grass-fed standards. And so this slide is just going to give us a bit of an overview of the current status of certification for grass-fed dairy. So there are established standards now that require a third-party certification. So the farmer is applying each year for grass-fed dairy certification and then getting an on-farm inspection and audit. And these are managed by a third-party entity. And for most of the grass-fed dairy farms, this is going to be an add-on to their organic certification because their milk buyer, their milk market, requires dual certification to both some of the grass-fed standards and also to the organic standards. But there is an additional grass-fed standard that is not an add-on to the organic certification. And this add-on is currently being offered by several different certifiers, mostly in the Northeast, but we're expecting to see more certifiers adding this grass-fed dairy certification to their offerings to clients that they're certifying in 2019 and 2020. So we expect to see this expand as the grass-fed dairy market grows. So just a little bit about some of the common things in the standard and how they're different from the organic standards that these farmers are already meeting. One is that in the organic standards, the minimum grazing season length is only 120 days. But in the grass-fed standards, it's longer at a minimum of 150 days. But we'll see as we start looking at some of the data next that the actual length of the grazing season is significantly longer than that for most of the farms, even pretty far up into the north. The pasture intake requirement, so this is the average amount of dry matter, the minimum average amount coming from pasture just during the grazing season, needs to be no lower than 60%. But again, we will see that the farms are significantly above this amount in dry matter intake during that grazing season. The organic standards on this one only require 30% from pasture. Obviously, no grain is allowed, but there's also the detail in the standard clarifies that we can't even have any grain byproducts in things like the mineral supplements. So that means an organic dairy farm needs to have their organically approved mineral supplement probably needs to be re-reviewed by their grass-fed certifier to make sure it's also allowed for the grass-fed standards. And then the grass-fed standards also require close attention to animal care, nutrition, and animal welfare to make sure that the animals are doing well with this all-forage system. Also, to anticipate some questions at this point, some of the energy supplements, such as molasses that Kathy Soder talked about yesterday, they are allowed, but there are some quantity limitations on the allowance of molasses and other energy supplements. There are also additional grass-fed standards for the processors or the manufacturing plant where they're making the yogurt or the cheese, and that is primarily focused on segregation to prevent commingling with non-grass-fed milk. So now I'm going to show you some of the data that we've had come in so far from these different funded research projects. And this initial bit of data that I'm going to show you primarily came in from the SARE project that's been administered by Cornell's team in New York State. And this was a survey that initially got sent out in the fall of 2016 to just over 140 farms that were 100% grass-fed. And at that time, that was all the farms that we knew of. And we had a lot of support and help from Maple Hill Creamery and Organic Valley in getting that initial mailing out in 2016 to make sure we could reach all of the grass-fed farms in the US that we knew of, though our primary focus was on the Northeast. And we had a very high response rate with 83 farmers returning their surveys. And then we were able to go on and send a survey out to those farms to see if they'd like to participate more in the research project and send in additional data. And 39 of them went on to do that. And then we ended up with 22 farms enrolling in the grass-fed monitor, which was the monthly production data collection system that was set up by Faye Benson at Cornell. And so that data started coming in every month from those farms starting in the spring of 2017. And then with the additional funds coming from risk management, then we were able to enroll 12 of those same farms in Dairy 1 or DHIA to get more detailed data coming in from them. So just to look at some of the information that came in this initial data, the dairy farmers who participated in the surveys had been farming as dairy farmers for 22 years, had been on average organic for 8.5 years, but had been grass-fed, 100% grass-fed for only 3.7 years. Though some of them in the study were very new, some of them had been doing it for a couple of decades. So with this rapidly growing market sector of grass-fed, obviously a lot of the farms were new and startups. Average herd size was 46 cows, but the range was anywhere from 2 to 6 cows on some of the micro raw milk grass-fed dairies to well over 200 head. Milk production, as self-reported by the farmers, ranged from 6,000 to over 10,000 pounds of milk per cow per year, but there were definitely some farms who were shipping quite a lot less milk than that per cow per year and quite a bit more. 60% in this initial group did report that they were at least sometimes feeding an energy supplement such as molasses, whether it was a liquid or a dried form, and we'll look at that a little bit more of how that's changed over time. One of the most interesting pieces of data that came out initially is this number of acres needed per cow. So this is just on farms that were not reporting any sales or any purchases of forages. So these are farms that are providing all of their dry matter intake to their whole herd, and this includes the cows and the young stock. And when we divide that number of acres out per mature cow, it's 5.6 acres per cow, which those of you with a dairy background know that's quite a lot more average acres per cow than on a typical dairy farm feeding some grain. So we wanted to go on and look at that quite a bit more. Also at the beginning group of farmers, 24% of them did report that some years they grew some annual forages for midsummer harvest of annual warm season grasses, for example, and some of them were also grazing those. Some of the other data that came in, we looked at the calf rearing systems and found that the majority of farms, once they eliminated the grain from the young stock's ration, they would increase sometimes both the quantity and the length of time that they were feeding milk. So most of them were feeding milk to the calves for 4 to 6 months. There were still a certain percentage, 18%, were still feeding milk for 3 months or less. But then we also had 13% who reported feeding milk for longer than 8 months. The calf rearing systems were also pretty diverse, so the majority of them were using a combination of either individual bottle feeding, bucket feeding, or a group feeder. 23% of the farms were raising the calves on their dams. So that means leaving the calves directly on their mothers. So for some of the farms reporting quite a low milk production being shipped per cow in the herd, this was one of the contributing factors, is they were raising the heifer calves on the dams and they were nursing quite a bit of the milk at certain times of the year. And then 18% were raising some calves or all of their calves on nurse cows, which is usually when 2 or 3 calves are grafted onto a cow to nurse. We also wanted to get some information on calving interval to try to understand the reproductive performance of the cows to see if their nutritional needs were sufficiently met in their dry period and after calving in the beginning of lactation, so they were able to cycle and breed back on time. And the farms reported, 26% of them reported that they were still on a 12-month calving interval. And some of those farms were certainly the 100% seasonal farms that have a fixed calving and dry-off window. And then we had 28% that report a 14 to 16-month calving interval, and some of them were longer than that. So we've got some additional data coming in on this now to try to learn more about this. Also of interest is the heifer rearing decisions on the farms. 46% of this initial group of farmers reported that they were raising all of their female calves, all of the heifer calves. And this may be in some part contributing to the need for a lot of that acreage per cow, because with that larger group of young stock, they're going to obviously have to come up with more forage for them. And also of interest, I didn't put the number here, but a lot of these farms report a relatively low cull rate because they have pretty long-lived, healthy cows with a low involuntary culling rate. And so at 46% raising all of their heifer calves, we know these farms are raising more calves than they need. Also, we took a look at the grazing systems. They varied quite a bit, from a few with continuous grazing systems, but most had rotational systems or variable recovery periods with high quality grazing systems. So now looking at some of the data coming in from the monthly grass-fed monitor. This started with 22 farms in the spring of 2017 and has dropped down to just 16 at this time, as a few farms have retired or exited dairy farming. We started out with about the same average as the large group in number of cows per farm, with 47 cows per farm. That increased in 51 as there were a couple of farms who were doing a planned herd growth to increase their herd size and the amount of milk they were selling. The number of acres of pasture for the milking cows, so this is just grazing acreage and just for the lactating herd, in 2017 averaged 1.7 acres, and in 2018 this dropped to 1.5 acres. And that's the maximum amount of acreage they were grazing that year. So in some of those acres, they were also taking a first cut and then grazing it later on. But it does give you a sense of the large amount of land, as they've had to increase the paddock size to increase dry matter intake to compensate for not having any grain in the ration anymore. So the total number of acres per mature cow on these farms came in very similar at 5.5 acres per cow. Again, these are just the farms that are not buying or selling any forages. So these are farms that are self-sufficient in forage. So we are looking at a really high land-based need on these farms. We did want to try to figure out if this was in part due to declining soil fertility. So we went back to those farms and checked to see, and the majority of them were bringing in some off-farm fertility inputs. We haven't done the math yet to figure out whether they were exporting more nutrients than they're importing, and that'll be part of our next research project. Looking at a little bit more of this data coming in, the grazing season length in 2017 was 184 days. Still crunching some numbers from 2018, but we're guessing it'll be a little shorter because a lot of the farms experienced a drought or dry weather. We asked questions about the length of the recovery or regrowth period of the pastures to try to get a sense of the quality and type of grazing systems that they were using. And we found the majority of the farms have a pasture recovery period which is variable, which indicates a good grazing system, and it ranged from 15 days to 60 days in recovery period or regrowth length, with the average regrowth period in 2017 being 36.5 days, and it increased in 2018 to 40.1, which we expected with the dry weather. Also of interest is the average dry matter intake from pasture was 80.4% in 2017 and 78.7% in 2018 on these farms. So significantly exceeding the grass-fed certification standard that they needed to meet. We also know that mineral deficiencies can be a challenge for the new grass-fed dairy herd once they're no longer providing all of the minerals in the grain mix. And so we wanted to get a sense of how much and what types of minerals were they feeding. On average, per lactating cow, they were feeding between 4.9 and 5.7 ounces of total mineral supplement. And this is a combination of different types of minerals and did include some kelp, along with either sea salt or a mined salt, and then various trace mineral mixes. So it was really just trying to get a sense of the overall amount being fed. And this is on the farms where we did not see any clear immediate mineral deficiencies, so it seemed to be working for them. Now, as you remember from one of the earlier slides, that initial group we surveyed, 60% of them were feeding some sort of an energy source. In this grass-fed monitor group, it was only 36% in 2017, and that was lower in 2018. Only 25% reported occasionally feeding some molasses. Molasses was the primary energy source fed on most of these farms. And some of the reasons for this decrease might be the lower pay price some of the farmers were receiving and just tighter budgets, but it certainly also relates to the fact that some of them were reporting to us during farm visits that they weren't seeing it was helping with some of the issues as much as they thought it would be. And I'd encourage you to listen to Kathy Soder's molasses webinar that was recorded yesterday when that comes online. So this also, some similar information to what Kathy reported yesterday. We're looking at milk urea nitrogen on these farms to try to get a sense of the energy protein balance in their nutrition. And what we saw in 2017 and in 2018 is that on average, when we averaged all of the farms' milk urea nitrogen together, came in at 12.1 and 12.4, which is spot on where we would want to see a dairy herd coming in. However, the range tells us a really different story, where we have milk urea nitrogen levels coming in from 3.7 to 28.6, which is much lower than seems ideal according to standard dairy nutrition, and then 28.6 certainly is a lot higher than we'd like to see. And we went back through the data to try to figure out if farms feeding molasses had lower MUNs, and we didn't see a correlation there immediately. So this is certainly one of the areas we'd like to do more research. So Abby Teeter at Cornell, who works with Faye Benson, generates a monthly report that goes back to all of the farms who are participating in the grass-fed monitor. And I'm not going to go through this data in a lot of detail with you. I partly want to just give you a sense of kind of the interesting information that farmers are able to get back immediately by participating in the study. And then also some of the interesting information on the difference between the averages and the ranges. So if you look at each one of so the horizontal axis here is the months going from March through February. We've actually overlapped 2 years here. So the red line is the average milk urea nitrogen numbers starting in 2017. And then in 2018, that average number is in blue. So you can see the average over the full range of the study in the lines, and then those dots represent the average milk urea nitrogen level for the individual farms in the study. So, particularly when you look in August, you can see there's a significant number of farms that have a much higher milk urea nitrogen level than the average. We also have a very wide range of milk production amounts in the study. So similarly here, this reports all of the energy-corrected or fat-corrected milk weights per cow per day on average in the dots. So you can see the individual farms in the dots. And then the average in 2017 is the red line, and the average in 2018 is the blue line. This is not information that is directly related to grass-fed production. This is looking at the somatic cell count, which is a measure of milk quality. But we did want to put this up here because this is some of the useful information that farmers are getting back from participating in the grass-fed monitor. And it shows that there are a few farms in the study who have a somatic cell count, which is sometimes exceeding the quality cutoff premium The green horizontal line and the dark blue horizontal line show where the milk buying companies stop paying the quality premium. And so there are a few farms who could lower their cell count and have a higher premium pay price. Just looking at more of the reports that the farmers get back, this is a page in the report that is generated to allow them to look at their current year information on their herd and compare it to the previous year information. So you can see they're getting information on the total milk produced, so the total amount that they're shipping, the amount per cow, and that's being reported to them both in a total pounds of milk and then also energy corrected or fat corrected milk, which just allows farms that are shipping a higher butterfat milk to kind of get credit for the fact that their cows are putting a lot of energy into producing that milk that has more butterfat in it. So just one more graph looking at some of the other information that the farmers are getting back. Not only are they able to compare their farm to themselves looking over time, so this top graph shows us the pounds of milk in green. The green bars is the average milk per cow per day. The red bar is the energy corrected milk, and then the two lines show the fat and protein in that milk for the one specific farm. And then the bottom graph allows that farm to compare themselves to all the other farms in the study. And the spots on that graph where the line goes all the way down to 0 are just farms where the data had not been reported from that individual farm yet. So now I'm going to shift gears and look at some of the data that is now coming in thanks to the risk management funds from farms that are additionally enrolled in Dairy 1 or DHIA. So this now, instead of just getting information on the entire farm each month, kind of an average whole herd per month, we're getting data coming in on an individual cow level. And the farmers are now receiving additional reports back from the researchers, in this case from the University of Vermont. So this is just some of the information that we're starting to get. We're looking at butterfat, protein, somatic cell count, additional milk urea nitrogen information, energy corrected milk, days in milk, lactation, and calving interval is new information that we're just starting to get in that will hopefully help us start to understand the reproductive performance of the cows in these grass-fed systems. And we're now able to break down how different cows in the herd are doing depending on whether they're young cows in their first lactation or in later lactations. So I am not going to go through all these numbers with you. I just wanted to put some of the information up here that the farmers are receiving back. Again, just telling us some of the same questions are coming up, which is we're looking at an average milk urea nitrogen level of 12.5, but the range from farm to farm ranged from 4 to over 19. But then when we dug in deeper, now that we have this individual cow data, the range was actually from 1, which maybe was a clerical error, to over 31 milk urea nitrogen. So we've got a lot more interesting research to do here, obviously. So this is the quarterly report that the farmers participating in this add-on Dairy 1 DHIA data collection are getting. This is some information for an individual farm where they can look at individual cows in their farm that are producing the highest protein, the highest fat, the highest volume. Also looking at average daily milk production per cow. And then the graph down at the bottom allows them to look at changes in total volume of milk produced per cow per month, energy corrected milk, looking at MUNs again, and also fat and protein. One more graph here. This is just another example of some of the data farmers are getting back, in this case, allowing them to compare themselves to all of the farms in the study, looking at total volume of milk, energy corrected milk, MUNs, and then fat percent and protein percent in that milk. And this is where the farmer is now able to look at things, and the researchers also are able to look at things on a per lactation basis, because farmers were reporting to us and are still reporting that the first calf heifers, or cows in their first lactation when they're still growing but also lactating and gestating, are some of the animals that are struggling the most to get bred back and might be losing the most body condition. And on some farms, farmers have thought those might be the farms that have the higher milk urea nitrogen levels. So now we've got this data just starting to come in as of partway through 2018. So we haven't started to assess a lot of this data yet. We're just starting to pull it together and report some of it back to the farmers. So one final graph, and then I think then I'll turn it back over to Heather. But this graph is, I apologize, it's a lot of dots, but it really is information that is pretty interesting. So this is it's reporting the milk urea nitrogen level of every single cow on every single farm in the study in the months of July in the left-hand graph, and then in the right-hand graph, and June on the left-hand graph. And so you can see this is just by anonymous farm ID number. So if you look at farm number 15, you can see that in June, all of the cows in that farm had a significantly lower, below average milk urea nitrogen level. But if we go to the farm right next to that, farm number 16, every single cow on that farm was well above the milk urea nitrogen level. So we also have some pasture qualitative assessments from these farms, and going forward we'll be collecting even more data to try to understand how much of this relates to what's being fed, the quality of the pastures, or perhaps the selection criteria and other management factors going on the farms. So Heather is going to take it from here with some conclusions and some more data.
Okay. Alice is
Yep, so you should have control if you just click on the screen there, hopefully.
Okay.
Work.
Great. Well, it looks like there's a lot of questions coming in, so I'm sure we'll have a lively conversation one-sided since you can't really talk, but you can type in questions and we can try to answer them. But we just kind of want to wrap it up with a few conclusions and then where we're headed. And you can tell from some of the data that Sarah was sharing that basically going on farms and starting this benchmarking program just created more questions, really trying to understand why these MUN levels can be really, really high on some farms and really low on others. Milk production is very different. I mean, there's a lot of challenges that we're seeing popping up, and then a lot of successes too. So, right now we're still processing a lot of data, and these projects are still ongoing. So, our initial survey really gave us a detailed snapshot, at least in the Northeast, of how farmers are managing these grass-fed organic dairies. And what was really clear to us was that people wanted to share information, that this group of farms wanted to share the information, wanted to participate in projects, and are looking for support, technical support. And I think one of the things we've noticed, one of the reasons we started this project was because it is a relatively new system for the farmers that are eliminating grain, and also for researchers and technical service providers. So we want to be able to support farmers, in different production systems. And so we're hoping that this helps us support this group of farmers better. So another conclusion is that by giving up grain and its ability to compensate for poor quality forages, farmers have enhanced their tools to profit through pasture management, harvest management, and genetic selection. So I think one of the things that we're really noticing is that, and Faye Benson, who we work with, mentioned this to us the other day too, is that this group of farmers that have eliminated grain have further eliminated a tool that many farmers have when the weather doesn't cooperate, let's say, and the forage that's produced in a given year is very low quality, or we have a drought and the pasture production is really low. So we have to really be working with farmers to overcome this kind of additional risk in a way. And so really focusing on pasture management, talking about irrigation often in places like the Northeast where this is not common, different types of forages, and then longer term emphasis on genetic selection for animals that can thrive under this type of system. I think one of the pieces that the farmers really have enjoyed is this reports, really getting to see a snapshot of their farm compared to others on a monthly basis, and really allows people to look at progress, see kind of challenges, maybe issues that are occurring, and really hoping that this can help them move towards the goals that they have on their farm. But again, I think, it has basically shown us that there's a lot more work to be done. Let's see here. I'm trying to move my slide.
Okay, it might have gotten out of control.
There we go. Thank you. So what's that? Did I go ahead too? Probably. Yep, there we go. So one of the pieces that we're just starting on is, and we'll continue with in our new project, is really this focus on forage quality, trying to understand what forages, species, varieties can help really enhance the overall feed quality on these farms. And I think this is useful information regardless of if you're grass only or forage only, or if you're any other kind of livestock farm. I'm pretty sure most farms are focused on trying to feed as much homegrown feed and less imports as possible to help the bottom line. And so, this is just some of the data that we're collecting with Sabrina Greenwood here at UVM and Sid Bosworth, where this is just some preliminary data. This is in situ data where we collected forages. You can see orchard grass, Sudan grass, white clover, meadow fescue, and millet, and basically placed them in cannulated animals into the rumens and looked at disappearance. In this particular slide, it shows crude protein disappearance. And if these forages, how different are they? And again, this is just some basic information. We're trying to get our methodology down, but we've been really interested in meadow fescue, and our farmers really don't care for orchard grass. But I think what was interesting just in this preliminary study was that we saw that orchard grass remains to be a very high quality forage. You can see in this particular graph that we had more crude protein disappearance with orchard grass, actually far more than meadow fescue. And we have a lot of farmers interested in meadow fescue because we're being told that it's a very high quality feed, very digestible. And so again, just I think more this slide is to show you that we are working on evaluating these forages and which forages might really be better for farms, especially those that are only feeding forage. And here's water-soluble carbohydrates. There's really a lot of interest in energy, and we know that getting enough energy on these farms can be challenging, especially when we're not feeding corn or corn silage or some kind of starch. And so trying to understand where we can make up for that with the forages that we have. And again here, I thought this was interesting. You can see orchard grass and Sudan grass actually with the highest disappearance rates of water-soluble carbohydrates, and the meadow fescue, again, being relatively low. This is a little bit of a surprise to me. So we're going to continue to do this work and, again, expand it quite a bit going into the future. But I think really, seeing that these annual forages are performing quite well, the Sudan grass in particular, and kind of standard orchard grass is very interesting to us. And this is type of information we're going to continue to develop so that we can help farmers, improve forage quality on these grass-fed farms. So what's next for us, and I can say with great excitement that we were awarded USDA NIFA Organic Research and Extension Initiative grant it started in September. Can't remember when we found out. I should remember, it was a big day. But yeah, so our team was just awarded this federal grant, and the focus is advancing grass-fed dairy, a whole systems approach to enhancing productivity, quality, and farm viability in the U.S. So we're just getting started on this project, and you can see we have a number of project collaborators, mostly, actually all of them focused in the Northeast. And we have Brent Beidler, who's a grass-fed dairy farmer on our team, Dr. Sid Bosworth here, an extension agronomist at UVM, Andre Brito from the University of New Hampshire, Roy Desroches from Tufts University, Sarah Flack, who you've just been hearing from, Sabrina Greenwood, a professor of animal science here at UVM, Jana Kraft, also at UVM in the animal science department, Meredith Niles, she's a professor here in the food systems program, Albert Robat from Tufts University, and Kathy Soder, who you heard from yesterday, all involved in the project, and Sarah Ziegler, who is she's like what do you call that? The cat herder, the cow herder. She keeps us all moving forward. Oh, and I noticed that Mark Cannella is not on this list. I think he might have got cut off on the bottom. There's too many people, but Mark Cannella with the University of Vermont, he's helping us with the economics portion of the project, and also Logan Peterman with Organic Valley has been a collaborator with us, and Tim Joseph from Maple Hill Creamery. So many people working on this new grant, hopefully excited about making a lot of progress with this system. So just quickly, the objectives for this project, I just listed them exactly like they were in the grant, and I can expand on each one a little bit. But objective 1, basically what we're doing here is we're going to do a survey again. Sarah talked about our first survey in the Northeast, but we're going to survey across the nation. So we hope to capture, or at least send our survey to every grass-fed organic dairy across the country, so that we can collect the same kind of information from farms outside of the Northeast, so that we can get a better look at what grass-fed dairies look like across the country. And then we also are gearing up to expand the benchmarking program across the country as well. So these will be basic benchmarks that we'll be collecting, focused mostly on production, and hoping that we can create a more inclusive benchmarking program for grass-fed dairy across the country. So we're very excited about that, and have the support from these cooperatives to do so as well. A new component that we're going to include is to collect cost of production data in the Northeast. So we're only going to do this in the Northeast, basically trying to create a model and framework to collect cost of production data from this specific organic dairy farming system. And of course, the goal will be to expand that, hopefully, to other farms once we get that model into place. And number 2, or objective 2, is looking at nutrient cycling dynamics. We talked about this a little bit, and there's been a couple questions about this. But farmers themselves are really worried about the amount of nutrients moving off of their farm, in the form of milk primarily, but sometimes meat and other products too. And the fact that they're not really bringing a whole lot back onto the farm. And this is something that farmers are concerned about, and we are as well. And so one of the things we're going to do is just calculate some whole farm nutrient balances, try to understand where we're losing probably more nutrients than we should be, and how we're going to overcome that on these farms with the amendments that we have available to us. Objective 3 is, again, really focused on forage management, forage quality, and looking at how we can improve forage management on the farms, looking at these forages themselves and species and varieties, using in situ techniques and fermenters to try to better understand how we can create a better forage package on these farms. And then 4 is our work with Tufts University. Tufts University will be working with our team to develop a better understanding of market demands, consumer preference, why are farmers or why are consumers choosing grass milk? What can we learn about the market at this time that can hopefully help us continue to grow the grass-fed market over time? And then finally, our ultimate goal is to collect this information and share it back with the farmers, help the farmers network with each other, and hopefully overcome challenges, improve farming operations, and continue forward with a successful grass-fed organic dairy industry. So that's the focus of our new project. Like I said, it's just getting started, just started in September. Our next step is to be sending out this survey to 100% grass-fed organic dairies in the United States. This, we just came up with our timeline today. We're just finalizing the survey and hoping to get the survey mailed out by mid-January out to grass-fed dairies. So if you have interest in that and you're selling to Organic Valley or Maple Hill, you'll be receiving the survey anyway. But if you're a farmer that sells to a different entity or maybe processing your own milk and you're on the webinar, please let us know because we'd love to include you in the survey as well. All right, so we thought we'd end the webinar, and I think we have a few more minutes talking about, and Sarah, I don't know if you want to do this or not, but this is some of the advice that farmers have, given to other farmers and to just comments people have made over time, some things that the farmers think are keys to success. So.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of questions coming in from people, many of them related to some of these keys to success. So I have attempted to type in answers to as many of the questions as I could, especially some of the grass-fed certification questions. But there's also some interesting questions coming in, Heather, that you may want to answer relating to depleted soil fertility on the grass-fed farm. And so maybe instead of immediately going through all of this, maybe do you want to say a few more things about your observations of the decreasing soil fertility on some of these farms? The question coming in specifically says, if they're doing really good grazing management, shouldn't the soils be able to really pull minerals from deeper in the soil and do better over time? And that's not what Heather and I have been observing, so maybe Heather can just say a little bit more about that topic, because it's certainly been a challenge for a lot of farms.
Yeah, and I would say seeing some depleted fertility goes beyond just grass-fed organic dairy. We've observed that and recorded that on many organic dairy farms in Vermont in particular. But yeah, it is true that more diverse pastures, better grazing management, and better management in general can really increase biology, can help pull nutrients from deeper depths of the soil profile. But that doesn't mean that new nutrients are being produced. So over time, there's you will see depletion of nutrients if you're not returning any nutrients back to the soil. So we can deplete lower layers of the soil or profiles of the soil and deplete everything. But I think really the concern is that we can't just keep taking and that we need to be replenishing. And so just understanding what that means, how much. What we don't want to happen is for people to get too far gone, if that makes sense. So what we're seeing is folks that have transitioned to organic in general, really focused on their animals, worried about their animals during that transition, and then not as worried about managing fertility in their fields. or forage management in general. And so we're seeing depleted yields. That's the first thing the farmers talk about, is not getting enough yield off of their farms. And then as we start to look at, soil tests in general, we're seeing very low levels of nutrients and lack of diversity because of that. So I think it's something we're observing, and we want to just make sure that we're addressing it where it's an issue. And that's not every farm, for sure. And there are many farms that are already monitoring and adding amendments and doing a really great job. But this is it's a new concern, because grain is fertilizer, actually. So what doesn't make it into the cow's meat or biomass or milk, gets deposited in the manure and then moved out to the fields. So just something we're monitoring. We'll monitor further in this project. Somebody else asked about, what if a farm can't afford amendments? That's a good point, but I also think one of the parts of this project is trying to put the return on investment together, because I think farms can't afford not to either. And so really trying to look at return on investment from, adding fertility, managing soil nutrients is really an important part of this project. And one of the co-ops anyway, and I'm not sure if they still do this, Sarah might be able to chime in, but Organic Valley does offer $1 per hundredweight to purchase soil amendments for grass milk farms, because this is an issue, and they're trying to help farmers overcome it.
And I'll quickly go through some of these. Bill, I saw your note that you weren't seeing my answers in the chat box. Hopefully they're coming through now. I'm not going to be able to answer all of the detailed questions on the grass-fed standards. Maybe we'll have to do a separate webinar on those. So this last slide is a summary of advice directly from the successful grass-fed dairy farmers, directed at other farmers who are thinking about adopting this system. And the number one thing they say is that you really have to plan ahead for a significant increase in total forage needs, and that forage needs to be higher in quality, so it's much more digestible. And so that's why, the data we're seeing is that you need more acres, both of pasture and hay. Obviously, you need a really good grazing system. All of the farms that I've worked with who've made the conversion to grass-fed dairy have had to increase their paddock sizes, add on more acres, or in some case, decrease their herd size somewhat to better fit their land base. Several of the farms report the importance during the winter feeding season of adding more feeders, more head space, reducing cow stress, eliminating competition for feed, paying even closer attention to monitoring body condition scores. BCS is body condition scores, monitoring reproductive performance, and watching the milk urea nitrogen. And hopefully we'll get better at understanding what those numbers mean on the grass-fed farm as we do more data collection. We do see some significant mineral deficiencies on some farms who make the transition to an all-grass system without planning ahead to replace the minerals in the grain once the grain is eliminated. And we find that most farmers do best with some sort of a loose mineral mix that allow the animals to get a significant number of ounces of the correctly balanced mineral. We are finding some nutritionists are now getting skilled and being able to work with the grass-fed dairies without feeding grain to make sure the forages and the minerals are balanced well. And then this note here relates to a couple of the questions coming in saying, what is the grass-fed premium that farmers are getting paid? It varies. I don't think I could give you an exact pay price for grass-fed milk these days. They do get a premium over the regular organic milk price, but it is not quite enough to cover the increased cost of production for all farms. And so it is important for an individual farmer to do the math, do that cash flow projection, and know that it is going to work better for them, because we do see, in general, a reduction in milk production per cow in the all-grass system, ranging anywhere from, in the ballpark of 25 to 40% as they eliminate the grain. Often, once they work out a successful grass-fed management system on their farm, that level of milk production can come back up on the farm, but it's generally still lower for the all-grass dairy. And then Heather's just talked about the importance of soils and soil health there too. Let's see. Oh, geez, we have 1 minute left and about 20 more questions.
Well, no, we actually have half an hour left.
Oh, good.
For the questions. So, yeah, I mean, we had said the presentation would take about an hour or so, and then we'd have an extra half an hour for questions. So we can get to as many as possible. Let's just see if there's, yeah, okay, so that was the last slide. So I think what I'm going to do is just go through some of these questions so that everybody can hear them, especially the ones in the Q&A box, which people can't see all the questions here. So, and then I know there's other questions in the chat box, some of which you've been typing in answers to. So anyway, we'll just get to as many as we possibly can. So, I just want to also mention just before we get to the questions that we have recorded the webinar. So if you did come in late and you wanted to see the beginning, you'll be able to watch that again on the eOrganic YouTube channel in about a week, along with the webinar that we had yesterday by Kathy Soder on molasses. And we would also very much appreciate it if you could fill out a follow-up survey, which will come to you by email sometime this afternoon. So moving on to the many questions that are coming in. Are small grain silages and pasture okay if they have not produced seed heads?
So some of these organics or grass-fed certification questions, I'm not sure we're going to be able to be the ones to answer those. I actually do think maybe we want to do another webinar on the grass-fed standards. I can answer some of these generally. So if the grasses in your pasture have headed out and the cows want to eat them, the grass-fed standards don't prevent that. But small grain silage made with a fully headed out grain would not be allowed in the same way that corn.
Okay. How about grain byproducts in approved medications?
Grain byproducts. I do know that any grain byproducts are prohibited in a mineral supplement. I'm not sure if the grass-fed certifiers are digging into enough of the medications to say that a one-time medication use. I'm not sure if a grain byproduct is specifically prohibited in that. And there are two kind of general sets of grass-fed certification standards in operation in the U.S. right now. The ones that I am working with most closely, because so far most of the farms in the study have been in the Northeast region. In Pennsylvania and Vermont and New York are kind of where the majority of the farms that we're currently working with are. We expect that will be expanding. And so the majority of them have grass-fed certification, which is an add-on to their pre-existing organic certification, because their milk market requires dual certification to organic and grass-fed. And that has been mostly done through NOFA New York certification and PCO, Pennsylvania Certified Organic. They both have had an ongoing grass-fed organic certification program. But AGA, the American Grass-Fed Association, also has a certification program, which is not an add-on in the same way to the organic standards, so it's a little bit different. But they're both managed with a third-party certification program and on-farm inspections.
Okay, regarding the 150-day minimum, can farmers fall below the 150 days by using allowed NOP temporary confinement, such as dry-off before calving?
So this is another grass-fed certification standard question I will not be able to answer accurately. But just to reference this question is in the organic standards, which are set by the USDA, their grazing season is only 120 days in minimum, and there are some exemptions for when you don't need to have the animals out on pasture. And at this point, I don't know what the specific exemptions to this 150-day minimum requirement would be. But I am not running into grass-fed dairy farms generally who are anywhere near that 150-day number. The farms in our survey, which is anywhere from northern Vermont all the way down into Maryland and Pennsylvania, they have a significantly longer grazing season than that generally. So I would say that they would have a lot of wiggle room in their grazing season, but we do have to plan for things like serious drought or high rainfall events and those other times when grazing is not possible. And so as those grass-fed standards get developed more, I'm sure they'll be addressing these things.
Okay, we just had a comment in the chat here, which I don't think everybody can see here because it just went to the panelists, but it says grass-fed certifiers are looking at grain in medications as well as minerals. Some allow trace amounts of mineral byproducts as a carrier or to serve other functions other than a macronutrient of grain byproduct, that is. So, yeah, okay. Thank you for the comment. What effect does grain have on milk chemistry?
One or two, yeah. So milk chemistry. Heather, you want to take that one, or you want me to take that one?
Well, I mean, I think that's part of our, part of our new study is evaluating kind of milk quality profiles, fatty acids, and aromas. I mean, a whole quality profile. We are not going to be comparing that, though. Actually, are we? I mean, would really be a question for Al and Roy at Tufts. So I guess I don't have an answer as to what we have looked at. I see Kathy Soder's on the call. She may know better. But.
And I would just say that in general, what we see from other people's research on grass-fed dairy products is that the nutrients we would expect to see in higher amounts are the omega-3 fatty acids and the conjugated linoleic acids. And so, there'll be more research on that. There's a pretty good meta study that got published on that earlier this year. I think in January that came out. Organic Valley participated in that gives kind of some good big picture overview of all of the research that's been done on that.
Okay, we have an AGA certified farmer online here, and he wants to know, what is the age of the first calving on heifers? He's calving his at 30 months.
So there are a lot of differences in kind of the young stock rearing and selection criteria on the farms. We have not collected data on breeding age and calving age and that sort of information. So I won't be able to give you a data answer to that. But I will say that most of these farms are aiming for about the same breeding age and calving age as the kind of more conventional grain feeding dairy farms. We do see some struggle to get those first calf heifers bred back. A few of them have been deciding whether they want to increase the age of first breeding, or if they instead want to select more for fertility, especially so those first calf heifers can breed back. And then some of them are focusing on different ways of raising their young stock. And one of the farms I talked to recently is focusing on raising a smaller number of young stock, so they've got more space at the feeders, feeding an earlier first cut hay that's more digestible to stimulate higher dry matter intake, and basically still trying to breed them at the same age, but doing everything they can to grow them a little bigger or have them thriving even more before they get bred. But we haven't got data on that age at first calving from our farms yet.
Okay. Do you have any information about using beet pulp instead of molasses for energy?
Some research has been done on that, but that's not something that we're specifically looking at, no.
Okay. Let's see, what are the grass-fed producers doing about reduced graze DMI due to heat stress?
Okay, so DMI stands for dry matter intake, and so this question relates to the fact that in hot weather, if the dairy herd or any individual animal starts experiencing heat stress, they are not going to eat as much. They'll have reduced dry matter intake, and so that heat stress, one of the many problems with heat stress is lower dry matter intake, and then cows can either lose condition, stop making very much milk, or become quite ill. So there are a lot of strategies being used to reduce heat stress. Some of the farms in the southern tier of Pennsylvania who are 100% grass-fed, there's a large group of them in Pennsylvania that are all grass, also some in Maryland and Virginia. They have a whole array of strategies on their farms for heat stress prevention and management, including pulling the herd off of the pasture during certain high humidity and high heat events. Some of them will put them into kind of shaded, glady, kind of silvopasture areas where there's edible forage in the understory and shade. Some of them will put them in a barnyard or a dry lot with shade. One of the farms that I've visited frequently has a misting system that creates a very fine mist over the backs of the cows, so it works like a natural air conditioner. Obviously, when they're in the barnyard, they're not grazing, so they're being fed a high quality, either fresh chopped forage or stored forage. And then also people providing shade along the sides of the lanes for access to the pasture, in the pastures when possible, and then also regular access to cool drinking water. I'm sure I'm missing something. I actually have a whole series of slides somewhere or other that's just on managing heat stress and maintaining dry matter intake. But certainly one of those strategies is then feeding stored forage and not trying to continue to have them meet all their dry matter intakes from just the pasture. And during the grazing season, the majority of farms do feed at least a small amount of stored forage in the form of baleage or something like that to supplement pasture during those periods of time when they can't get all their dry matter intake from the pasture. I'll answer one other question that just came in, which is on medical treatment data. We have not collected any data on medical treatment on these grass-fed dairy farms. It's a bit outside the scope of what we're doing.
Okay, yeah, I've noticed a lot of the questions have been disappearing, so somebody may have been typing in the answers here. I noticed that there was one comment about how someone said that in Missouri he was getting a $3 premium per hundredweight, and we've had a couple other comments about that kind of thing in the chat box. Someone else said $3 to $5. Kathy chimed in and said that the local price there in Pennsylvania is about $4 per hundredweight premium over organic. And then someone else also said $3 to $5 for grass milk. And one of those, $1 of that is for soil amendments as mentioned. And ISU studies showing added cost as $3 to $4 per hundredweight. At least that's what he has seen from Organic Valley producers. So thank you for sharing those comments. I'm going to move on over to the chat box here because it looks like a lot of the other questions were typed in answers because they disappeared from my queue here. So let me just scroll down here. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, there was the question about when farmers don't have the money to purchase the needed input. So Heather talked about that. Okay, so how does the percentage of grass-fed farmers receiving a quality premium compare to the percentage of all farmers receiving a quality premium?
I'm not sure if that question relates to somatic cell count or the grass-fed premium, but yeah, we don't have data yet on income and pay price being received, so we don't have the information, the detail on somatic cell count premiums coming in.
Okay, and also, this may have been addressed before, but I'm going to ask it again anyway because it's a little bit differently worded. It said, do you happen to know the age at first calving, and does that correlate with issues experienced by first calf heifers?
Yeah, that was the question I tried to answer and didn't have the anser for on age when the heifers are first bred.
Right, okay, yeah, it was a different person here. Let's see. Is there a third-party processor verified standard in the works to ensure only grass-fed milk is processed as such?
Yes, so this question relates to the grass-fed certification. Again, there's some of this is still in development, but there are farm-based certification standards relating to how the animals and the forage and everything is managed. And then there's also inspection that happens at most of the processing plants where milk is being turned into yogurt or cheese to assure segregation of the grass-fed milk from the non-grass-fed milk to make sure there's no commingling. But, I have to say, with all of these questions relating to the grass-fed standards, this industry has grown so fast. I mean, we know that there are twice as many farms now than there were 2 years ago when we first started the SARE-funded research, that the standards have had to evolve to keep up. And I'm in regular communication with some of the grass-fed certifiers as they get questions in from farmers. Then they have to, go to a group of people and say, hey, wait, we haven't gotten this question before, and we need to develop more standards around this. But there certainly are, I do know that the processing plants are having third-party audits to verify there's no commingling and there's good segregation of the grass-fed and the regular other milk in there.
Okay, let's see. When you're looking at disappearance of CP and WSC as a percentage of the initial, would orchard grass still look good if you looked at it in terms of absolute numbers? In other words, is 60% of meadow fescue more nutrients than 80% of orchard grass?
Right, so we did look at the absolute numbers as let me see, I just got to bring up the question again.
That's Bill. Hi, Bill.
Good questions, Bill.
Yes, we did look at the absolute numbers. The absolute numbers weren't that different, actually, between the orchard grass and the meadow fescue, if that's the question.
Okay.
But as I mentioned before, too, we're just starting to evaluate that data. We just got all the numbers back, so just showing where we're headed with the data. But we are comparing the absolute. I don't have the question in front of me, so I need to. Sorry, Alice.
That's okay. And going back here to a lot of questions and answered here. Oh yeah, okay. So if you looked at in terms of absolute numbers, in other words, is 60% of meadow fescue more nutrients than 80% of orchard grass?
Right. So we did look at the absolute numbers, and I agree that could be shown in a different way to highlight what you're referring to. But the absolute numbers and difference between orchard grass and meadow fescue to start with, they weren't very different in terms of initial quality.
Okay. Now I think, let's see. Okay, so you answered the question about correlations between grazing management and soil nutrients levels, and you haven't found, you haven't looked at the correlations yet, but that will be monitored in the new project. So
right.
I think we've gotten to the bottom here of the many questions that we've had in the queue here. So I'm just gonna give a couple more seconds here for those who might want to type in a final question. This is a golden opportunity here to ask the experts, but hopefully we will be having more webinars about grass-fed dairy production in the works as the project progresses, because there is obviously a great deal of interest and it is a growing market. So it looks like that is it for the questions. So I'd like to thank everyone for all these excellent questions, and just remind everyone that the recording will be available in approximately a week, and we would be grateful if you could fill out our follow-up survey. So thank you so much, Heather and Sarah. It's great to have you back, and we hope you can all join us for our many other webinars on a variety of organic farming and research topics this winter, which you can find just by typing webinars by eOrganic into a search engine. So thanks everyone for coming.